Welcome, everyone, to another Voices with Vervaeke. I'm here with Ken Lowry. Now, Ken is a patron of mine, and Ken reached out to me a while ago and said he found some important similarities between my background and his, and bridges that he was building between my work and his rapprochement with Christianity, perhaps is a way of putting it, or something like that. I'll let him speak more specifically about it. So we had a couple of off-camera, off-recording conversations. I was really impressed with Ken and what he had to say, and the way in which, his work. Sorry, he's taking my work into his life in a way that is very important. I like to talk not only to the theorists and people, but I also like to talk to people who are trying to put things into living practice. And I was very impressed when I talked to Ken. So Ken, welcome to Voices with Vervaeke.
Thank you. Yeah, no, that's very kind of you. I appreciate it. Yeah, I've found your work to be incredibly helpful to me in trying to make sense of the world that I'm living in. For me, I was raised with a kind of fundamentalist Christian frame of reality. So that is a similarity that we share.
Yes.
I don't know, I don't know too many specifics for you, but you've mentioned it was a traumatic kind of experience for you. I felt a little bit less of that for me, but I certainly had a deep sense of kind of dissatisfaction coming out of that. Just I was missing something, and for me, my journey out of that, and it's interesting because it's not exactly something. It's one of those things that as I've come out of it, I've also gone deeper into it in a way, and I mean that about Christianity overall. But yeah, my journey out kind of started with Jordan Peterson, and two ideas specifically from him that really changed my life. The first was tell the truth, or at least don't lie, because I didn't understand the connection between me actually speaking truth and my own experience of reality, and that every time I didn't engage forthrightly with my speech, that I actually created a disconnection between my sense of reality and the real itself.
Right.
So from that point on, I started to try to, not just avoid speaking lies, but to actually purposefully articulate the world as accurately as I could. And then the second point was treat yourself like someone worth caring about. Because I think one of the damaging things for me from my upbringing was the sense of always trying to put the self to death.
Right. Mortification kind of idea. Yeah. Right.
Yeah. And the deep sense of guilt that just overrid everything for me.
I remember that.
Yeah, and the interesting thing was, it seemed like no matter how hard I tried, I was always wanting to want the thing.
Right.
I wanted to want, salvation and God and connection to the real. I didn't really know what that meant, but I never knew how to actually want it.
So you were at like something like an aspirational impasse. It was actually an aspirational project, but this is something that we share. There's this aspirational project, but there's not much understanding of the nature of aspiration in that framework. And so it's mostly stick and very little carrot. And that tended to be, as you said, it tends to be very, very, it's very disabling of people in a powerful way. And so those two things actually took you out. Like, did you stop attending church? What did that mean when you said they took you out of that framework?
So for me, the framework looked very much like you're not allowed to ask questions.
Right.
So
yes.
That's really the big frame for me that I came out of, was that this is the way, this is the only way. Don't question these things.
Right.
I still attended church for a while. I do occasionally. Sometimes I'm kind of in the midst of finding my way in that space. But Anyway, fast forward, I ended up bringing some meditation into my life, which ended up having a very powerful effect.
Yes, again, very similar. Yes.
Yeah. And then I came across your work following your podcast with Jordan. That was maybe a year or two ago now.
I guess so, yeah.
But then I'm not sure exactly. I guess all of these things played in, but there was a point, and I believe it was last September, where suddenly there was a coalescence of a lot of these frames. And I had paid some attention to the story of the fall previous just in my life, but never deeply questioned any of the pieces that, I just kind of accepted the model I was handed. And then following engagement with your work in the meaning crisis, and Jordan Peterson's work and working through those stories, and then my own experiences in meditation, there was like a moment. It was a crazy moment that all of it just kind of slid into place, and I was like, aha, like that's what's going on here. And so since then I've just been exploring this space. So that's kind of this particular perspective of that whole idea, and the story of the fall, and kind of that story is part of what I'd like to talk about with you.
Sure. So yeah, so I'm interested about this. We've talked very well together before, but for all of our similarities, there's a difference in that you have, in some sense, returned to Christianity, and I don't find that personally viable. But nevertheless, I want to provide this space for you to articulate how you've been returning and reinterpreting and restructuring, because I found it powerful and helpful. So you take the lead now. Can you take us how you want to proceed into the conversation?
Cool. Yeah, I mean, one thing as a caveat, I don't even know what it means to be a Christian exactly.
Yes.
So I try. One of the things that I found is I try to not identify with anything, and that will come to be clear when I talk about this.
Please.
But yeah, so I'll try to lay out my model a little bit. So one of the first things that I realized, I was working with identification of self, because I was trying to understand, like, where can I actually stand? Because I realized no matter where I was holding my beliefs, I was standing somewhere, but then every time I turned around, that wasn't a good place to stand. And so finally I came to the sense of realization that the only place I can actually identify myself is in awareness. And that everything else, kind of a Cartesian doubt thing, but
yes,
beyond that, like, everything I interact with is a model and a construct of reality. And so so that's the lens that I used to start to think about the story of creation and the fall. And so I thought, well, if what I am is awareness, and what it means to be human is to be made in the image of God. And there's this, the scene where Adam's created out of the ground, and then God breathes the spirit into Adam.
Right.
So I think that's awareness. I think that is awareness, and that, God, this whole idea of God and creation, we're always trying to get a grip on what that means and postulate it in different ways. But ultimately, we're always still looking through our own lens. So for me, the question of who God is, I realized I have to understand who I am first.
Interesting. Very Augustinian move. Very Kierkegaardian move, actually. Yeah. Very Socratic move, actually, too. I think that's where it ultimately goes back to. Please continue, Ken. So open that up for us a bit more. What do you mean? I'm getting a sense. And maybe also pick up on where the fall fits into this emerging picture.
Yeah. So I'll just walk through the symbolism of the story real quick. So I view the whole story as a symbolic one, not as a literal one. And
so very much Jonathan Pageau kind of framing.
Yes. And so if what I am is awareness, my interaction with reality is by means of a construct that is presented to me through this interface. And if what I am is the image of God, and my awareness is the image of God, then God is something like awareness as such.
This is a David Bentley Hart move of consciousness as such. Go ahead.
Yeah. And, God creates with words. And so in this sense, like creation becomes the communication of God's construct to us.
Mm-hmm.
And so in Adam and Eve, they're created and they live in the garden. And the garden is the representation of the flowing of life,
right?
Life in flow state. I think it's also importantly symbolic of the internal self.
Right.
But they live in the garden, and one of the things that bothered me for a while is the idea that maybe there was something about Adam and Eve before the fall that is different from human beings now, in terms of kind of a qualitative move. And I don't think that's right, because Adam names the animals. And I think that's kind of the fundamental. So there is the sense of subject-object dualism prior to the fall, but Adam isn't stuck there. So when in the fall, you have the two trees in the garden, the tree of life and the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And these represent things that are always available for us. A tree is a stable life form that is ever present. And Adam and Eve see the tree, they know about the tree. God tells them don't eat the tree. So it's not until they actually participate, until they eat the thing and it becomes a part of them. So until you engage with the thing such that it becomes a part of you, whatever this knowledge of good and evil is, you can see it, you can even relate to it, but you can't participate in it. Because when you do, you will die. And then the other important point was that they're naked and they're not ashamed and they walk with God. And that the nakedness implies an absolute lack of any kind of disconnection. There's no sense of I and thou. There's no sense of holding piece of the self that is not connected to the whole.
Right. Yes.
And so then when they go to look at the tree and they're tempted by the serpent, and the serpent says to Eve, God told you you will die, you will not surely die. But then he says, God doesn't want you to eat the tree of the fruit, or the fruit of the tree, because in the day that you eat of it, you will become like God. And then as soon as they do eat the fruit, they now have to clothe themselves. And there's this sense of disconnection, there's this sense of fear. And I realized that it's the identity of the self. It's the identification of the self in a place such that I can say, this is good and this is bad. In order to do this, in order to take the knowledge, I have to contain within myself some kind of standpoint of the real. I have to become the arbiter of reality.
Yes.
And thus, instead of having a standpoint where God is here and I'm an explorer, that is this like projection out of the fullness of consciousness of God that is exploring reality. Now I invert that to say, this is me, I'm here, reality's out there,
right,
and it has to fit onto my model. And so this is that. Oh, there's so much more here, so I'm trying to condense it down. But
no, just keep going step by step. Just follow it as it goes.
That move into subject-object dualism, that move into, this is me. Now, Adam and Eve are trapped in their own bodies. They're trapped in their own bodies in such a way that if their body dies, their construct dies. Their perception of reality, the world they've built, dies. And this is now the real world. And so they must protect it. And thus you have the putting on of the clothes. The very next story is the Cain and Abel story.
But before we go on, what does that mean for you Like, so how, like, how did that translate into your own self-awareness and self-knowledge? Is it that you were reinterpreting the fall as the loss of non-duality, and that returning to non-duality was how you were interpreting the participating in God? Am I understanding you correctly? Is that what happened for you?
Yeah, so I missed a big point here.
Okay.
So as soon as I reify my construct, which is the claim of knowledge, right? As soon as I say I know, and I have to hold on to this thing,
Yes.
my relevance realization in that
Yes.
moment becomes constrained to this thing.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
And thus I can't pay attention in the way that I do when I'm in flow state,
Right.
when I'm free. Before the fall, Adam is able to commune with nature, interpenetrate, in a sense,
Yes.
the very reality itself in such a way that his attention is never constrained, his relevance realization is never constrained.
Yes.
But
So,
as soon as the claim is made, my relevance realization becomes constrained, and I lose the ability to be in harmony.
mm, mm. So, I mean, this has a lot of similarities with aspects of Vedanta and Zen. Were you reading any Eastern philosophy at this time as you were doing the mindfulness practice?
A little bit, and also at the moment, my model of talking about this, my language is constantly changing and shifting, and I just finished reading Religion and Nothingness by Nishitani. So,
oh my gosh, one of the all-time great books. Astonishing book, astonishing book. Yes, and that's very much his notion that religion is the real self-realization of reality. Yeah, very much. I see what you're, so for you then, God is, and I'm basing this on something like this. God is more of a verb than a noun for you. That's how it sounds to me.
yeah, I mean, I guess, one of the ways, without claiming identity of it, my lens through which I see reality is very mystical. I'd say
Yes.
it's very much
Yeah. Yes.
like
Yes.
a Christian mystic.
Yes.
So, yeah.
Right. So, in what way did this? Let me try it differently. I want to be really responsive and responsible to what you're saying. Why did the Christian imagery hold your attention and not the imagery provided by Vedanta or Buddhism or things like that? So, for example, Nishitani doesn't speak, well, he does speak about something like the fall, but he speaks more of shunyata than he does of God, although he will speak of God. And so the metaphors tend to be different. The symbols tend to be different. So was the attraction to the Christian mythos, was there something special about it for you? Or was it just, and I don't mean this derogatory, or was it just that what you had been brought up within? And so that was the mythology that you had most internalized. I'm trying to get about how these things are coming together for you.
Yeah, I think the biggest reason for me is that I see the Christ story and the story of the death and resurrection of Christ as being the direct inversion of the fall.
Right, right. So unpack that then. That's great. That's helpful.
Yeah, so one of the ways, a metaphor that I like to use in talking about this is the metaphor of a mushroom, where the mycelium is underground,
right,
and the individual fruiting bodies pop up in different places.
Right.
And while it's not perfect, I think that's a good metaphor of thinking how we relate to God. That we are like individual points of awareness coming out of the whole to experience the whole in a way.
Right.
And with the fall, with the shift of the self as becoming the reference point of reality, we sever something of that disconnection. We
Yeah.
cloud our construct, we cloud our relevance realization.
Yes.
And
So this would be the fruit failing to realize its participation in the mycelium. Am I understanding the metaphor correctly?
Yeah. And then you get some kind of disconnection, right? But you have to have some level of connection or you just die.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Because it is reality itself.
Yeah.
And so then the whole Old Testament is the movement of individuals gaining insight, both immanence and emergence, through these connections, and trying to act out and learn and codify some kind of way in which to relate correctly to this greater whole.
Mm-hmm.
And then in Christ, you have the coming, like Christ is the last Adam, right? So it's the reinstantiation of Adam, but he's presented explicitly with the primary temptations that are temptations within the ego self, within the self, as understood by itself. You know, he goes into the wilderness, he's totally broken down, he's totally laid bare in terms of his physical or maybe human defense mechanisms. His awareness is laid bare by 40 days of hunger and loneliness and all these things. And then he's tempted with preservation of your own individual incarnation. And then with trust, are you going to trust to the goodness of life, the goodness of the plan of God, regardless of all? And then finally, the temptation of virtue, which is if you claim to know what's best in yourself, you can enact positive change in the world. And he resists them all through the simple faith, right? The simple, I will not make myself the reference point.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And there's this, this important claim that that Christ is fully man and fully God. And he lives an entire lifetime, shortest lifetime, but lives an entire lifetime in that frame, such that connection is never severed. There's no clouding ever of the construct. There's no obstruction of relevance realization. And then eventually he's killed by the two formalized, systematized means by which man's ego attempts to gain control of the world. The Jews on one hand, with the attempt of religion, codified religion and laws, and the Romans on the other with attempt of physical force.
Mm-hmm.
These two means come together to kill the incarnation of God himself into reality. But of course, because he had never disconnected, he never severed that connection in any way, the transcendence of the awareness of the spiritual of God himself was able to re-envelop the physical.
So this is very, very interesting. When you were describing Jesus in the desert, that for me resonated with some profound meditative experiences I've had, where you get down to this bare awareness, bare attention, and then the temptations to project the world from an egocentric narrative become very prevalent in the mind. Is that, you're nodding and smiling, so there's that resonance for you. So when you're doing this symbolic interpretation, what I'm hearing is often you're taking the myth, and then you're finding a way of interpreting it so you can actually participate in enacting it within your meditative practice. Wow. So you're nodding very vigorously. So it sounds like I'm getting it right. I'm understanding. Yes.
Yes, and ideally, actually, just in my moment-to-moment life.
Yes.
I mean, one thing that was transformative for me was the realization and learning of the term theosis.
Right. Yes.
And recognizing that's there's this pathway such that there's legitimate potential for my whatever this is, because I don't know. There's all kinds of models, but I have no idea how this actually works or where I am in relationship to this thing. But to the degree that there's potential for, God himself or reality itself to find connection through this experience, I actually have the potential to engage in that.
Mm-hmm. 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 So you often do a Spinozistic thing, which I like. You often transpose God with reality or ultimate reality back and forth. And you said there's something going on in reality that's now, it's not clear what you're saying. So I'm going to turn it into question. You're saying sort of consciousness as such, which is, like I said, something that David Bentley Hart has done from actually Neoplatonic perspective, although he's aware of Eastern philosophy. But I assume you don't mean that consciousness as such is anything like our egocentric consciousness, or even like anything like our temporally bounded consciousness. Is it more that there's something analogous in reality to relevance realization? Here, let me, and I don't mean analogous in disappointing sense. I mean, they're both participating in a shared thing. So let's go back to Nishitani, defines religion as the real self-realization of reality, right? And so and he's playing with the fact that realization can mean making real and also becoming conscious of, something I play with too. And so there's something like reality is doing a kind of self-realization, and we are doing a kind of self-realization in consciousness. That's exactly how you described your journey. I came to realize that whatever I am somehow bound up with this awareness. And there's something, they're the same, but they're not categorically or numerically the same. It's like the way reality is realizing the way reality is self-realizing and the way you are self-realizing are somehow the same, or they can at least conform to each other. Is that what you're saying? Is it something like that? Because I don't hear you saying idealism or panpsychism, that everything's just in the mind or everything's made out of consciousness. I don't hear you saying that. So I'm trying to find out the third thing. I'm worried that I'm imposing my own thing, but I'm trying to use something that we were reading together, which is Nishitani. And is it something like that? It's like there's relevance realization, and right, the way consciousness is a self-realization and the way reality is a self-realization, there's something deeply the same about them, even though they're not numerically or categorically identical. Does that feel like it's landing for you?
Yeah, I think it maps. One of the ways that I have thought about this is it's as if before I lived in a space where I was never sure what was exactly real, because I was identified in my map of reality. I was identified in my construct.
Yeah.
And then I moved to a space where, and this is mostly where I am now, where I recognize that the map is the map.
Yes.
And that real reality is beyond the map.
Yes.
But insofar as I am interacting with real reality, it's mostly through the map.
Yes, it has to
the map.
It has to be. It has to be.
Exactly. So then.
Go ahead.
Oh, sorry.
Well, I just wanted to propose something. It's actually talking about consciousness in the cog psych class this morning, so it's uppermost in my mind. The thing about a map is it's representational, and the thing about a map is it actually is this here is pointing at that there, right? And then what I hear you saying is you're trying to drop below something that's representational in nature and more like equal participation. The world and you are both participating in something. You're not right. So there is, well, I would say there's a kind of participatory knowing that's underneath any kind of representational map we're making. And that is what actually allows the map to be true or false or accurate or precise or something like that. Am I playing with your metaphor well?
Yeah, I think so. And I think this is where the participatory aspect of the relationship to God comes in.
You saw Jesus as epitomizing that. So I mean, and I there's parts in the New Testament where Jesus is described as the icon of God, or the icon of the invisible God. That right that and to see Jesus is to see God, but it doesn't mean you're looking at Jesus. You're looking through Jesus, right? Right. I and the Father are one. I'm in the Father. You're in me. Jesus is making all those kinds of participatory union moves, which of course are getting misinterpreted by the Jewish. I think calling them the Jews is really unfair. It's probably a group of people associated with the Sadducees, associated with the synagogues. And to break away from any anti-Semitism, we said sort of the religious authorities of that period and place. And they are interpreting it as blasphemy. And then, interestingly enough, of course, the Romans are upset when they are understanding it as a claim for divine kingship, of being an emperor. And so these are the two misinterpretations of the participatory relation. No, it's blasphemy because, right? No, there's this absolute difference. Or no, it's a threat because there are God-men's. They're right, and they are the divine kings. And how dare you threaten the existing power structures? And I see Jesus as I think, and this is where the crucifixion is the crucifixion, not the crucifixion and the resurrection, but the crucifixion is essential because Jesus is actually willing to die to say both of those models of I and the Father are one are wrong models. I mean, he has to die to show that. Now, here's the one part I bump up against in this. So now I'll ask you a question. So on the cross, he says, my God, why have you forsaken me? And, and he's quoting a psalm, and the psalm is actually ultimately a psalm of the salvation of God. But nevertheless, so I'm not claiming he was right, that he was saying that he was forever lost or anything like that. But there seems to be the declaration of a profound sense of separation, because he uses the language forsaken, or at least the Aramaic equivalent of it. So what do you make of that? What do you make of it? Because I've always found that, I mean, for me, that's the pivotal moment. And for me, that's the pivotal problem for any sort of, I don't want to be dismissive. I don't know. I'm searching for an adjective. But any sort of rather automatic Trinitarian interpretation. It's like, what's going on there? What's going on there? So what do you think? What do you think, Ken? I mean, and if you don't have an answer, you don't have an answer. That's fine.
Right. I certainly wouldn't say that my answer is satisfactory on any level beyond just my own understanding. But
yeah,
I guess the way I think of it is, I realize that for me, the picture of Christ, of the incarnation, was so focused on Christ being God, or Jesus being God, that I never was able to map Jesus as a man onto it very well.
Right. And so you can't really identify with it in any fashion. That's exactly sort of my experience within the fundamentalist frame I was brought up in too. It's like, in the end, it's like, I don't care about Jesus because I can't possibly be Jesus. And so that's perpetually irrelevant to me. And like you, I was only able to come around to understand, sorry, this sounds so hubristic, but understand Jesus in a way into which I could enter into a right relationship with him again, by moving towards the kind of thing you and I are talking about, this idea of Jesus as being the pristine participation in God. That's how I often think about it. And so that the best way to see God is to look through, in both senses of the word, through Jesus. But then, okay, so go ahead. But
there's this way in which myself as I understand myself is not ultimately real. Like my ego as a self-consciousness that is conscious of itself.
Yes.
It exists within the map.
How so?
Because probably, go ahead.
Well, because presumably you need some awareness of the map in order for the map to be a map.
I'm not sure I followed you there. Sorry, say that one more time.
Well, let me try and step into it step by step rather than just sort of flinging it at you. All right.
Yeah.
So John Searle, and in discussions about consciousness, makes an important distinction between intrinsic or inherent attributes and or properties. Let's use that so we don't get confused. And attributed properties. So we'll talk about identities. Being money is something that's attributed. So it's not ultimately real because there's only money if there's entities that are willing to treat pieces of paper or pieces of metal or marks on a computer screen as if there are exchanges for labor, right? So that's why currency from, well, the American Confederacy is not money, because there's no group of people that are willing to trade it as money. Is that, so it's attributed. Whereas being gold is presumably intrinsic. Even if there are no human beings, there's gold, and it would have the properties of gold, right? And here's the thing that's problematic. I understand to some degree what people say when they say things like, they say the ego isn't ultimately real because the ego is some sort of attribution of reality to a particular kind of narrative. Is that fine? You're saying this narrative is really real, and what you want to say is, no, it's a narrative, and narratives can't exist unless there's consciousness. Is that okay?
Sure.
Now, the one thing that can't exist in a purely attributive fashion is consciousness, because consciousness is the thing that does the attribution, right? And what I find, and which is, and this is a long thing about when, and Chris and Greg and Chris Mester Pietro and Greg Enriquez and I did a lot of it in the Elusive Eye, is when people say things like that the self isn't real, they are ultimately then they then transpose a lot of the function of the self, the locus of identity, the locus of causality, etc., back into consciousness. So it isn't that big of a move, right? It sounds like a big move, and then when you realize, oh, self-consciousness is a big part of the self, and self-consciousness is a big part of our experience of consciousness, our knowledge of consciousness, then the attempt to dissolve the self into nothingness becomes very problematic. That's why you see this weird paradox in a lot of the Eastern traditions, even in Zen. I've heard Zen people say, well, the no self is actually your true self, and weird language like that, because they're trying to get to that point. So that's why I wanted to challenge you. That's the nature of my challenge.
Yeah, and I mean, this is, I may have said it poorly, and I may not have it very well in my own head. So,
Ken, don't be apologetic. Like, I'm certainly not here to try and dispute you or refute you. I'm trying to, like, we are working together. We're just going to work together on this.
I think what I mean is something like any point at which I say this is me and that is not me.
Yes.
Is ultimately not real. So I can sit here and I can say this is me and that's you,
right? But
only on a specific level of understanding and in a specific framework is it. And there's this, deep interpenetration of, like, maybe for example, I use my marriage. My wife and I are, like, if I try to talk about myself in any important way,
it's bound up with her. It's bound up because you've internalized her, and you indwell her, and you internalize her, and she indwells you and internalizes you. And that's just a particularly powerful instance of a general fact that we are constantly indwelling the world and internalizing the world. Do I understand you correctly?
Yeah. So what I'm trying to get at is that the attempt to hold on to any particular concrete identity of the self.
Yes.
that's where there's this real, well, ultimately I would claim that's something like original sin.
So this is, now you're sounding, and then this is no way an insult, right? You're sounding very much like Vedanta. When the ego forgets that it is actually grounded in Atman, and that Atman is Brahman, that is the source of all suffering. And what we need is moksha to release us from the ego into the Atman and realize its identity with Brahman. It sounds very much like that. Is that?
Yeah. Yeah, one way I would talk about it is like, what is my life really? It's a whole, string of frames of time.
Yes.
And my friend Steve has a wonderful way of talking about this, where, to the degree that my awareness inhabits each frame of time, but does not hold on to them, yes, and lets the last one go, it doesn't hold on to any frames, yes, then I'm fully present, and there's a sense in which all of reality then is bound up in that particular moment of experience of time.
Well, I was going to ask you, and this is again Nishitani, that argument you made about you and your wife, and then we extended to talk. I mean, that is the case for everything, right? All of the universe is, going into this object, and this object is bound in relationship. And Whitehead has a similar model, right? And the net of Indra, like this is something that, and Spinoza Scientia Intuitiva. So across many different epistemological, cultural, and ontological backgrounds, you get this same kind of thing coming out. So are you then, and so, and you invoke Jordan Peterson, are you then something like a perennialist, that all of the religions are sort of saying this, and maybe, and then they have to say it, and we'll put in a dash of Jung. They ultimately say it mythologically because you can't say it literally, because literalism bounds you into propositional logic, and propositional logic can't deal with these kinds of identities we're talking about. Is it something like that that's happening?
I think there's a lot of that. I look at the different religious frameworks as different paths up the mountain.
Yes, Mount Analog.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. And I think, I remain in, again, I try to not hold any identification of self with anything, but I remain primarily in the Christian frame, because I think that in the model that I see it, I think there is something particular about and I know I didn't answer your question about the Christ on the cross, but I think there is something particular that happened there, yes, with that binds all of reality back together in an important way.
Yes, I've heard Jordan make this argument too, and I think Jonathan makes this argument in variations, and Paul Vanderklay make this argument. They make it in different ways. Paul talks about finesse and the personalization of ultimate reality triggers the best of our finesse machinery. And then Jordan says something to the effect that the Christian mythos is the best one because it gets suffering best. Like it, yeah. So, and I don't want to put words into Jonathan's mouth, but Jonathan makes arguments about Christianity seems to be the best at getting how the ultimate is in the lowest level, and the lowest level is taken up into the ultimate level, the kind of Neoplatonic agapic argument. I make an argument about Christian Platonism is really special in the way that it integrates the accounts of the logos and accounts of agape together. But unlike them, I don't give that a priority for the following argument. I prioritize certain things according to certain virtues. So, for example, I'd say to Jordan Peterson, well, why make the best account of suffering the epitome? Why not make the best account of mindfulness your epitome? And then you should be a Buddhist. Or why not make the best account of flow the epitome? And then you should be a Taoist. That's the kind of problem I have with these arguments. Now, Jonathan has a bit of a better case with me, because I think there's an independent argument to be made for Neoplatonism. But I'm interested in, that's what I tried to capture when I said sort of a pristine participation. There's something especially beautiful about Christ's exemplification of participation that can attract me much better than this can in some fashion.
I think for me also, and this is my personal journey,
Yeah.
there was a radical flip that happened for me. And like, I had the particular moment where this started to come together for me that I mentioned earlier. And then I went in the shower, and I was showering and thinking about the fall and this stuff. And then all of a sudden it hit me what Christ and the resurrection and redemption meant in terms of the flip back.
Yes.
To and the, you know, the crucifixion of self, and it's no longer I who live, but Christ who lives in me.
Yes.
And all these kinds of things. And it just, like, it all just clicked for me. And I remember, you know, praying in a very kind of classic Christian way of like, oh, I want to be saved. Like, I want to be redeemed.
Right.
I want and it was no longer did it have anything to do with any sense of self as
you weren't getting metaphysical fire insurance, right? That's
exactly.
That was not what was motivating this, right?
Exactly.
So, right. So, oh wow. So I want to stop and zoom in on savor that. So what was fundamentally different is you actually experienced a metanoia. Before you wanted to want it, but now you found that you actually wanted it from the inside, if I can put it that way. And that's the metanoia. And for you, that is the central thing that has to happen for Christianity to be realized. That's I think you're okay with it. That's for you, that's what it means to be born again. Is it something like that?
Yeah, because that's how I experienced it. I mean, I was a totally like, my experience of myself, my experience of reality, my experience of everything, like, fundamentally shifted. I mean,
this is a very powerful model, right? Because what I've been seeing you doing, and we've already talked about this, and you said it, Lance, is you've been taking this mythos, and then you've been finding a way of, I'll use your language, of mapping it into fundamental things that are happening within your mindfulness practice in a profound way. And when they take, that's when you had the metanoia, and that's when you found you no longer wanted to want, you actually wanted salvation. And for you, that's the moment in which Christianity becomes realized. Am I getting you?
Yes, very much. And one of the biggest senses of how it shifted was I no longer had any fear about whether I was right about something, right?
Yes.
Like, especially in a propositional way. And this is one of the things that bothers me with the whole argument of like, who's better and whose way is better. Because when Christ says, I am the way, the truth, and the life, no man comes to the Father but by me, I think what he means there is that he is the personification of truth.
Yes.
And that to engage with truth, especially in the way that I talked about earlier from Jordan Peterson's perspective, is to engage with Christ. Like, you know, there's this deep issue that I felt where for a long time I had this model about what Christianity and God was, and it was somehow over here, and then reality was over here.
Yeah.
If this is actually real, it's embedded in the thing.
Yes. Well, that's what I was going to say to you. Part of what it sounds like also happened is your understanding of truth fundamentally changed. It went from, a mapping between a representation and the reality to no, what you just did with your hands. No, truth is this is the Heideggerian point. This is the Platonic point. No, that propositional truth is dependent on the trothing, the binding together, the confirmation, the conformity, not the confirmation, the conformity, which we turned into confirmation, right? All of that. That's what I hear you saying, that also what happened was a fundamental shift in your understanding of the truth, of what truth is, I should say.
Yeah, and that it's something that I cannot have.
Oh, that's beautiful. Say more. What do you mean by it's not something you can have?
It's something that I can explore. it's something that I can engage with. It's something that I can.
Only the being mode, never the having mode.
Exactly.
Yes, yes.
Yes.
So you can only participate the truth. You can't hold it as propositions.
Yes, exactly. And thus, every proposition that I ever say is held with a really significant, and the weird thing about propositions is that's also the map, right?
Yes, yeah,
And
yeah.
so anything that I'm holding is held with a certain degree of knowing that it's also not.
Yes, this is, please pay attention to the adjective. The adjective is paramount here. This is Kierkegaardian and Socratic irony. This is not what we typically mean by irony when, in the postmoderns, but this is, yes, exactly. It's that Kierkegaardian Socratic irony that, right, I cannot do without it, but I'm always trying to see through and beyond it.
Yeah. Yeah. And now I just, part of the reason we're talking now is because I'm just trying to figure out, well, how do I play in the world now? Because now I can, like I have this voracious desire to learn, and I read all the time and I watch videos and it's amazing, but it's like, okay, where do I engage? Because I don't necessarily have something to sell people or something. Come participate in this. It's just, hey, like, wake up a little bit, like.
Well, you want to be in fellowship, celebrating with other people is what it sounds like. Well, I'm glad you're reading books like Religion and Nothingness. That's a powerful.
I've got a lot of recommendations from you, and I have yet to find one that doesn't deliver more than I expect it to.
Well, thank you for saying that, and that's due to the people who wrote the books. I'm just privileged enough to have been able to study them and hopefully to a significant degree appreciate them. So Ken, like, I've watched you also come sort of progressive. I mean, part of it, you're just getting more comfortable, but you're also becoming more progressively more alive, and you're like starting to light up and glow, and something is starting to shine through you. If you don't mind me asking, and feel free to say it just to me, John, I don't want to talk about it, but like, what does this metanoia for you mean for your relationship, for example, to your wife or to people that you previously worshipped with, etc.? What has that meant for you, if you're comfortable with answering that question?
Yeah, absolutely. I find that I don't have so one thing that I find is that I notice frequently patterns of speaking and behaviors that get in the way of what I actually mean to convey.
Right. Yes. I am aware. Yeah, I'm really familiar with that too. And I'm often in the midst of speaking. I'm already realizing I don't want to continue the proposition that I'm uttering. Yeah, I get that totally. I get that. Yes.
Yeah. So that's been one big. That's the place that I pay attention to and attempt to provide space to change. But overall, it's been profoundly helpful in every area, because that I don't have a thing to project anymore. So it's been deeply affording, just to connect with people. Whether it's I'm very fortunate that my work is in medicine, and so I talk to people every day as a medical provider who's sharing decisions with them, decision making that's life or death for lots of them in many ways. And the ability to be there with them but not attached to any particular thing has been just really, really wonderful to engage with.
So let's play with this, because you brought it up, because I think it's really important. We don't have much more time, and so maybe we'll just initiate the conversation and we'll pick this up when you come back. I'm hoping you'll come back to Voices with Vervaeke.
I'd love to.
So a lot of times when people hear the language you're using, you're not attached, they get a sense of detachment, which is often a translation of a Buddhist term. And then they hear the English sense of detachment, which means I don't care. It's irrelevant to me, one way or the other. I'm not attached to it, right? And that certainly can't mean well, I'm presuming it doesn't, that's not what you mean when your relationship to your patients. I don't care what happens to them one way or the other, you know, that's presumably not what you mean. Am I right? So
Yeah.
what do you mean then? What do you mean then?
What I tried to say this well, I find that when I go to speak with a patient, especially if I'm trying to help them orient towards some issue that they're facing in a way they're not currently oriented, if I am attached to the fact that they look at it the way I want them to look at it, then as soon as that doesn't happen, because invariably it doesn't, there's a sense of uncomfortability. I'm not able to meet them where they are.
Friction and frustration. Yeah.
So I think by detachment, what I mean is I am open to the process unfolding however it unfolds, and that I see myself not as an agent of trying to make a specific formation of information, but rather an agent of trying to just open up a relationability between a person and a space.
So I propose to you that what you're saying is you want to participate in the logos and follow it however it goes in the gathering together of the sense making. And so what you mean by this detachment but not attach is actually you're in dialogical relationship with the person, dialogos through and through, and that both of you are trying to come into a stance that allows both of you to co-participate in the logos. And then within that, of course, there's a agape, because to properly participate in the logos is to love the creation of meaning beyond one's egocentric perspective.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
That's fantastic. Okay, Ken, this is not done. I just have to end because I have to go to another meeting. So I would like to invite you back, and we're just going to continue on. You still haven't answered my question about Christ on the cross, but this has been unfolding wonderfully. But I would like to give you the last chance to, briefly have the last word.
Yeah, I guess overall, I'm grateful. I very much am grateful for your work. I'm grateful to talk to you and to all the people who are engaged with your work as well. That helps make it what it is, and I'm very grateful for that. I'm just somebody out here and trying to follow the logos, as you said. So I've started a YouTube channel just to talk to people. I don't have any particular bent with it, but if anyone has found any of this interesting and wants to engage with it, you can make a comment on this video and I'll try to reach out.
Well, not only that, Ken can send me the link to his YouTube channel and I'll put it in the description of this video.
Wonderful, thank you. And yeah, great to see you.
Well, thank you so much, Ken, and I'm looking forward to us continuing this dialogos together. We'll talk soon.
All right, see ya.